repurposed it.
Probably could have sold it back.
Yeah, I probably could. Waiting for gas prices to go back down.
They are.
The car's been sitting in the garage for a couple of weeks. Yeah, I noticed that. Seems like the numbers are starting to trend a little bit.
Well, they took the tax off. I think they did.
I almost paid $6 a gallon somewhere. I know.
Gotta go to Costco.
What?
Gotta go to Costco.
Yeah.
Go to Costco, yeah.
It still was up over 5 a couple of weeks ago for premium. But
That's-
it did drop back down to like 485 when we went last
That's
week.
pretty good right now. Do you go to the one down in Lantana for gas?
No, the
Yeah,
one on North Lake.
They have gas?
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But
the
you're-
North Lake location does.
I need to get back to, I don't go down North Lake
but
very
you'll
often.
stand in line.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what time you go.
It goes pretty fast.
If you go first thing in the morning, it's usually not too bad.
Okay.
And even if the lines are long, it goes quick. They've got 3 bays on each side.
Oh.
So it's not bad.
Ah,
You were recording.
thank you for that.
Streaming.
Good evening, Lori. How are you tonight?
Feels nice in here.
Good evening, everyone. This is a workshop meeting of July 5th, and today we're in the council chambers, and we are Zooming as well as on YouTube. Mayor Young is on the Zoom, and she is here, but let's take a roll if you don't mind.
Mayor Young. Here. Vice Mayor Stone.
Here?
Councilmember Diambra.
Here.
Councilmember Brandon.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Can I get a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 So if we can start with number 1, discussion of ordinance 1020 regarding e-bike operations on the village sidewalks.
So this is an item that was brought up by Mr. Stone a few months back, in 2020, December of 2020. The council adopted an ordinance that prohibited e-bikes from the sidewalk. State law had changed previous to that allowed for local government to take action on that. At that point, the council decided to prohibit them from the sidewalks. They had the option to allow them on the sidewalks or prohibit them altogether. I guess they had a couple different options, and council decided to prohibit them from the sidewalks. So Mr. Stone wanted to revisit this item, so that's why it's on your workshop agenda.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this back up for a couple reasons. I've had a couple, well, at least one incident where I was on Country Club, and there was a gentleman on an e-bike riding very normal, but it was taking up space in the road and making it very difficult to kind of go around him with other oncoming traffic as well. And I've always thought that the e-bike is not the issue, but more of the operator could be the issue. And feel like that we are over-regulating this item, and wanted to bring this back up for discussion.
Well, I know at the time this came up, and we discussed it, I think there were a couple of us that were concerned about limiting e-bikes to the traffic lanes, particularly if they're being driven by younger individuals. We recognize that there could be a safety issue on sidewalks if they weren't driven properly, but the safety issues, I think, were, significantly greater if they're in the highway and somebody doesn't see them and they get hit, whatever. So I think, if I recall right, I think I was in favor of allowing on the sidewalk with some guidance or restrictions, but I still probably feel the same way. I still think there's a greater risk, particularly, again, to the younger riders, if we're telling them they have to ride in the highway. So that, I guess my view on that hasn't really changed.
Yeah, I think it should, personally, I think it should be up to the guy riding the bike whether or not they feel comfortable riding on the sidewalk or the road, but obviously in a safe manner in both ways.
Yeah, yeah.
you know, we have big sidewalks. I wouldn't want my kids riding their e-bikes on the street. I agree. I don't think we can start putting more into it, like, if you're this age or this age, it's gotta be like
Yes, sir.
one or the other, right? And I've gone through the same situation. The e-bikes, they're more of a casual ride, and the riders just tend to take up so much more space on the road. They're a lot more difficult to get around than those on the road bikes and 10 speeds. So I'd like to see them on the sidewalk, I think. Certainly.
Have that option. I just want to see them have that option.
Yeah, it's certainly
Not have a prohibition.
Correct. Lori?
Thoughts? Is this becoming a thing where a lot of people are complaining about it, whether they're on the sidewalk in the way of pedestrians or that they're in the roadway too much?
Has it been anybody complain to me?
Like, is it, not just you, but is anyone feeling like, you know how we always get complaints about golf carts? I mean, is this really taking on where we're getting a lot of complaints that it's even an issue?
I think when we first talked about it, I don't think there was any complaints at that time. And so we were just trying to foreshadow as a council to get something in place.
Okay, because I mean, we used to have not us as a council, but I've heard it in the past, where it was an issue with regular bicycles on the sidewalk. But yes, we have a lot of people using the sidewalk bicycles because it is safer. But I'm so torn with that, because if we're putting, and I know the state allows bikes on sidewalks, but then why do we have bike lanes? And why do we keep talking about, even in the future, connectivity and more bike lanes and pathways, and if we're just gonna put everyone on the sidewalk? So I'm not necessarily against it, but if we're gonna keep adding more and more and more to the sidewalks, what are we actually calling the sidewalks? Are they pathways for everyone to use? And I wanna be cautious because we talked about it last time, that the e-bikes are becoming more popular, and yes, they are very expensive still, so they're not in every household, but as they become more accessible and affordable, we will probably see in the future more use of them. And if the sidewalks do become more crowded with them, then I think we're gonna have an actual issue of possibly too many items using the sidewalks. And that's what I wanna be cautious of, is if we go forward with allowing them on the sidewalks, it is possible that in the future we will have to look at rearranging some of the use of the sidewalks, if it happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think kids, adults can already ride their bikes on the sidewalks. In most cases, if somebody's getting an e-bike, oftentimes it's a replacement for what was formerly just a manual or pedal situation. So I don't know that it's gonna be more congested or more crowded. And as far as, adding bike lanes, we've talked about that, but right now, the only bike lanes we have are on US 1.
And nobody
Yeah.
uses them.
There's some people that use them, but US 1 still has an issue because of the speed limit at 45. It was never reduced, so, there's still some safety issues, but it has increased people's willingness to walk on the sidewalks because now they're not right up against the traffic that's blowing by at 55 or 60 miles an hour. So, and we have some restrictions on some of our roads where we may not be able to do bike lanes, such as Tequesta Drive. So, again, I hear what you're saying, I understand what you're saying, but I think it's one for the other. Either I'm riding a bike that I'm pedaling, or I can go to an e-bike. But to me, as Kyle said, it was a foreshadowing. It was kind of trying to anticipate what would be the overall safest approach for anyone involved. And as Kyle said, I think that having a prohibition forcing people out into the roadways, I don't think that's sound. There may be places where people feel safe on the road. There may be other places where it's like, hey, I need to be on that sidewalk just because of where I am within the village or whatever the traffic flow is. So,
And I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I mean, I have no problem if somebody wants to run the sidewalk. I just don't see it as an issue of, like it is with other items in the roadways.
I mean,
It just-
we're prohibiting it right now. You don't even have, theoretically.
I mean,
you
do
don't
people
have the
actually know
option.
that we even prohibit it?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, mean,
Because I
technically,
understand the last
ordinance
conversation we had
does.
too, is officers had a hard time deciphering if the bicyclist was using the motor versus pedaling, how did they determine that? So that's why I'm really on either side of this, I'm just
And that's another
trying to be
reason why I'm
cautious of
against
it. Okay.
Yeah, so if you're gonna have an ordinance, you need to enforce it. If we can't enforce it because of the challenge you just cited, then let's get rid of the ordinance and let them have the
And we are
option.
sticking still with no golf carts on the sidewalks?
Has nothing to do with golf
Okay,
carts.
so it's solely just the e-bikes?
This is purely
and
just
bicycles,
the
okay.
e-bike. Mary Young?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm kind of going back and forth on this one too. I think there's really good pros and cons to consider. I haven't seen this being an issue the way the ordinance is now. So I'm kind of inclined to leave it as it is for now. If we did allow e-bikes on the sidewalk, I would like to see them at a lower speed, but I think Aaron kind of brought this up, and that's going to be hard to monitor and enforce, I think, as well, if you request lower speed limits on the sidewalk. I do feel I'm still leaning toward leaving it as is for now.
You know, when it comes to speed, they go somewhat faster than a manually powered bike, but if you really wanted to, you could get your bike with 15 gears cruising close to that speed.
Absolutely.
But would you? No. And if a police officer were to see someone driving like that on their foot pedal bike, they would get stopped because it's reckless. So, I mean, I think speed is really not an issue.
If they're split, somebody would need to.
And then there's actually one legal question I'll ask when they're
Yes, ma'am.
available. So if we were to have on the sidewalk, we already have bicycles are allowed and pedestrians are allowed. If we allow e-bikes, out of those three, what is the order of right-of-way? Does a pedestrian have the right to keep walking and the bicyclist has to use a bell to get that pedestrian out of the way, or vice versa?
Well, generally speaking, pedestrians typically have the right-of-way. However, there's nothing in the code or the statutes that I'm aware of that says if you're on the sidewalk and you're all allowed to be on the sidewalk, that one of them has to step aside for the other. You know, it's, if you're on a bicycle, obviously you're traveling faster than someone who's walking, so, you know. Typically in practice, as you said, the bicyclist will either ring a bell or say behind you, or I'm coming up, and then the pedestrian would hopefully step out of the way as opposed to getting run over or the bicycle going in. You know, it just
Yeah.
becomes a matter of everyone
Courtesy?
being courteous
Common sense.
and using it. But if you allow them all on the sidewalk, then they all have the right to use the
Okay.
sidewalk.
Because what I don't want to see, and I'm not saying it'll happen, but what I would not want to see for our village is, and I'm not trying to knock on them, but the big groups of bicyclists that kind of don't adhere to the road rules and they think they own the road, and then it becomes, a cluster and confusion and a safety hazard when they're not following the rules either, and they think they have the right of way on it versus a vehicle. And that's why I'm just concerned how many things we're adding on our sidewalks. And I know we've talked about expanding them, but logically, we didn't have the room to do it and the money. I just want to be cautious.
And, to add to the discussion that you've been having, and even if you were to codify some sort of rule that a pedestrian on foot has the right of way over a bicycle, how you would enforce that, it would,
Yeah,
that
for
would
me, it
be
would just go into
extremely
education.
challenging.
Just,
I would
hey,
think.
this is what our ordinance now says. Be courteous. Maybe have a bell or something on your bike to alert them coming up behind you.
Well, I mean, you really bring up a great point, and I understand the difficulty of codifying it. But I wouldn't be afraid to codify it and say pedestrians have the right of way, and then that becomes part of the education process, right? So you're saying, you put that out to people and say, if you're riding your bicycle, whether it's an e-bike or a regular bike, on a sidewalk, just like a pedestrian has a right of way if they're crossing the street, pedestrians have the right of way. And then that becomes part of what you try to educate people on, rather than, appeal to the courtesy
I'm
and
not saying
everything
it'll
else.
be perfect, but if it's
No.
somewhere writing, it's there.
And I only mentioned
for
it
some
because,
guidance.
back to your original discussion back when we put this ordinance on the books, there are more things you can do. If you'll recall, there are different classes of e-bikes based on the top speed, and there were discussions about, well, maybe we should let the class 1 e-bikes, but not the
Yeah,
class
you're
3,
right.
and then it gets to, well, how are we gonna really
Enforce that.
know what's what?
But I
And that's
agree,
gonna be an
there was made that
enforcement
comment, how
nightmare.
you
So
write
that's the
it.
only reason I bring up the enforcement angle on your question.
Okay.
I don't think it would be unlawful to put that code in your ordinances.
Sure.
But no matter what, you can regulate recklessness. You can enforce recklessness.
Right.
On any part. Okay.
Yeah, look, bottom line for me is if e-bikes and bicycles were both invented at the same time, they both would be allowed. They'd both be on the sidewalk right now. But e-bikes are new and they have a motor and people think about the top speeds. And I think it's kind of natural to go, that should not be on a sidewalk. But, you know, like it was said, a lot of those e-bikes are replacing bikes that were on the sidewalk anyway. So it's not bikes just multiplying and, you know, taking over sidewalks. So I think it's an easy thing.
I have a 74-year-old client that has an e-bike, it's a three-wheeler. She just goes and gets outside on a sidewalk, which is much better than on the road, so.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like we've got at least three of us that are in favor.
So what happens there?
So we're in a workshop setting, as you know, a motion or action can't be taken. If there is consensus amongst the five of you to bring this back to be repealed, I can start working on that. If not, then I would advise that somebody would need to actually make a motion at your next regular council meeting and then if it passes, then the direction would be given to do so.
Well, Lori or Mary Young, is there a consensus to bring this back?
At this time, I think I'm still in favor of leaving it how it is.
Okay, fair enough.
But is there three of us that are in favor of?
My opinion has always been consensus means the entire group.
No,
So-
but you're saying if there's not a consensus.
Right.
Then we would make a motion at the next council meeting.
Correct.
So can we have this on the agenda? Because I think there's three of us that are saying we are in favor of revisiting this.
You know, how the agenda is set is an administrative matter, and even if it wasn't on the agenda, you could
Okay.
bring it up under
We
any
can
other
still raise it.
matters.
Okay.
But I don't think I can proceed tonight to do
No,
anything
I understand,
based
I
on.
understand that.
Okay. So we're good to move to item number 2? Or is there any comments from any residents? All right, moving on to agenda item number 2.
Number 2 is discussion of the appropriation request for Tequesta Park. The House in the legislative process came up with a local support grant program for $175 million that allows municipalities and I guess representatives to ask for appropriations. And so instead of being part of the budget process, they set aside money and then everybody applies through that program to get appropriations. And so with all the discussion that we had with Tequesta Park in the past, just wanted to, I guess, inform the council that there is a process for that. Unless there's, objections, we'll move forward to submit an appropriation request. The thought, after talking with our governmental affairs consultant, that we would apply for the engineering, the soft costs in this process and not ask for the whole thing. Originally, I did not have the estimated cost, but Kimley Horn, the gentleman who did it for us before, was gracious enough to provide that for us with the new renderings that we have approved. And so this request will be based off of that master parks plan that was approved by council. And so moving forward, unless there's any requests or any objections, we will be submitting an appropriation request as of tomorrow, and then they have to get it submitted by July 15th to be a part of this process. So it's just more of informational, unless there's some direction you want to give me outside of that.
So this is in addition to going through the budget process?
This is outside of the budget process. I mean, the budget process, that was already done. What they did in that budget process, they set aside $175 million, almost kind of, I'll say, discretionary funding that they could, appropriate for projects through, instead of it being kind of wrapped up in the overall scheme of things.
We got a couple of questions. Do they do this grant every year?
This is the first year they've done it, so I don't know that it will continue or if this is the new thing. I'm not sure.
Fair enough. Aaron, you got any questions?
No, I do not.
Lori?
Not this time.
I say let's do it.
Mary Young?
Yeah, I think we're in a much better position and better prepared to submit this year than we were last year. And just to have it on the record, I know estimated maintenance costs, operation maintenance costs are expected to be, what was it, Jeremy, around $103,000 more than it currently is?
Right, and just to summarize for anybody who picks this up, a portion of those costs, 35,000 was going to additional maintenance costs for the splash pad. There was an additional 20,000 for ball field maintenance. And then there was some additional costs that we currently don't fund now today. So it was estimated a little over $100,000 more with the new design that we approved through council.
Yeah, and I think, that's a substantial amount more, that the residents will be paying for. But I think if we were to get the money and, we could potentially, value engineer, the plan a little bit if we need to, or maybe phase some of the work, like we are with Remembrance Park to make it work. So I'm in favor of submitting it.
All right.
I am as well. Any comments from the residents?
Yeah, we do.
Marcia Nielsen, 94 Beechwood Trail. This is the same thing again, we're looking at, the same thing? You're asking for 4% of their total, which is kind of much. How much are we have to pay for this one, this go-around, where we're going after money? How much to the consultant?
We haven't paid anything to the consultant.
So he's gonna do this bonus, he's gonna consult and do all this to get this going?
Do what?
Well, you have to get one of your representatives, right, to put it forward. That's the way I read it.
We
So it has-
have a government affairs that's under contract that we pay on an annual basis, and so he will go out and get our representative to sponsor these items, but we have an annual contract.
To me, this is going back over the same thing again, and the things that we brought up before, the whole maintenance thing and everything else. We're opening that kettle of fish again.
Any other comments from residents? Okay. I think we'll move on for number 2. Agenda item number 3. Mr. Davis.
Several months ago, you will recall, we had a contract for the provision of some goods and/or services relative to the water plant. I don't recall what the chemical was or what the service was, but the vendor came to the village and asked for a price increase based on supply chain issues and labor issues and material issues. The village agreed to that, and we amended the agreement. As a byproduct of that activity, the council asked me to look into ways to add some additional language into our form contracts that might address these type of issues and try to better protect the village, so to speak. Very challenging. The on the one side of the equation is, you have a contract that says what the price is, and that's that. On the other side of the equation is, if, depending on what the circumstances are, and then the vendor, like using the example that we just went through, the village could have said no. That contract was set to expire a couple months later, and then you run the risk of that vendor not being willing to provide that good or service to the village in the future, depending on the availability, and other vendors could put you in a difficult situation. So, that's sort of the rub. We did draft some new language. It is redundant in the workshop backup. We have a couple of different templates, depending on whether we're purchasing goods or services, or if it's a piggyback contract, but the language is essentially the same, and it really just tries to say, if there's going to be a change order, it needs to occur prior to the delivery of the good or service. After that, it won't be considered. So we did add that language that with some blanks that need to be filled in terms of timing based on the individual circumstances, but we did come up with that. It's brought back to you for further discussion and consideration if you want this language or this language modified to be added to our form documents or not.
Well, I think it makes sense. You know, there can be extraordinary circumstances as we incurred this last time around, and we want to have some flexibility, and I think it's important that the provider understand there's a process that they have to go through in that situation. I like the fact that we're keeping the days open so that, you know, depending on whether it's good service, what the circumstances are, we have some flexibility, obviously, to insert the appropriate number of days. It's not just a standard set. But I thought the changes you made were good, so, you know, I'm in favor of going forward with this.
Concur?
Yeah, reads well. I mean, it is redundant, but it's pretty consistent across the board.
I like that it opens up the opportunity for new solicitation for new services or products if they do come out, kind of leaves that opportunity. So what happens if a vendor does not like this agreement and they decide to cross it out and strike it through? And
So then we're in a contract negotiation setting, and we can decide to
Or before
accept
that.
that edit or not, and then they can decide if they want to do business with us or not.
Okay. Mayor Young?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a little stronger language in there to protect the village. Keith, are there any other municipalities that have kind of similar language?
I could probably find something out there. And quite honestly, we may recommend this to other of our clients if this works here in the village, that this is sort of a test case.
Okay, and then just a couple questions. What is the, under change orders, what is, it includes a change order deadline? Couldn't really figure out what that meant. Anywhere else in the
That is another way to say the performance date, which is in the paragraph above it, so which would be,
okay.
yeah, it's synonymous with performance date in this case.
Got it. Okay. The only thing I've seen there, but this might be too stringent for a municipality's contract, is sometimes they'll give them X number of days after the, condition was identified or realized. I don't know if that's anything you've seen, or if you think that would be too stringent for this.
There would be nothing wrong with adding that flexibility into this as well. Again, I'm sure I could find something out there, but I haven't seen it at this point.
Okay, and then the other sentence, change orders submitted after the change order deadline will not be considered. Does the supplier of goods or services, do they still need to perform that for the original agreement, or are they, if you don't accept the change order because it's past the change order deadline, they don't have to do it?
Sure. If an agreement with this language was accepted and signed, and a change order was requested after that deadline, and we said no, and they stopped performing, in my opinion, they would be in breach of contract, and then we would have legal remedies against them as we would anybody who's in breach of any contract.
Okay, yeah, as long as that's clear, if that wasn't clear to me when I read it, so that was my only question. But I'd be in favor of adding this and see how it goes, because like Kyle brought up, if it becomes an issue, we can always negotiate, but a lot of these terms I see all the time, and they're not uncommon.
If there's no objection from any council members, we'll incorporate this into our form documents and start using them immediately. just to let the council know on this topic, and it's not in the form document you have, because this is a new change, but there was legislation that passed this last session regarding immigration enforcement. It's going to be another boilerplate paragraph that we're going to have to add to this. It's not in here, but I'm going to need to add that in as well to be in conformance with that new statute. So that will be another add to the form.
No issue. Yeah, good.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 4. Mr. Allen.
So in April 2019, council passed a policy that, in this particular, what we're talking about tonight, is that we limit the number of items on a workshop agenda to 3 and 9 o'clock. I know Ms. Young has brought this up and wanted to discuss it and see where council was about removing the 3 items limit to the workshop agenda. So with that, I'll turn it over to Molly.
I thought we should revisit this. I think we should always keep the 9 o'clock cutoff, for sure, but, you know, I think we can, when we put the agendas together, I think, you know, we can use our common sense and judge the content and how long a topic might take to discuss. I mean, for example, we're gonna be done in probably under an hour today, and we had 4 agenda items, so I think we should allow the flexibility to add more, depending on what the backlog list is, but just use the best judgment, and, you know, if it's gonna be a heavy discussion item, don't put as many agenda items on, but keep the 9 o'clock cutoff time for sure. I just wanna see if anyone else was open to that.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I actually, I know Vice Mayor had brought this up on a couple of occasions, and I was thinking, during my prior time on the council, we had the time limit, but we did not have a limit on the number of items. And I was always wondering where that came from. Well, obviously now I know. But I agree with you. I think that, you know, one of the criticisms of government sometimes is we take too long to do things. So even though I said tonight if we ran long, I was going to have to leave a bit early because my daughter was visiting. We're not going to run long, which is great. Good job, Kyle.
We're not done yet.
And I do think that, as you said, we should, you weigh the items that are listed, how much time you think each is going to require. But if we can tackle 5, 6, 7, 8 items in an evening and get them done and move forward, I think that's a great thing. But I agree with you, keep the time limit at 9 o'clock and not extend beyond that.
I can't add anything to that. I agree.
Yep, same here.
I think there's benefit to the government moving slow. And I'm not opposed to adding more agenda items, but I do think it's important that we do take our time throughout this process. For instance, the bike thing, I've been talking about that for over a year now, and it's just part of the process. You just stay on it. If it's important, you stay on it. So that's just my only opinion. I think we should.
Yeah, I'm not
If we need to
advocating.
take a special meeting, we'll do a special meeting.
Yeah, I'm not advocating we rush through things.
Right.
I'm just saying we use common sense. But I think Molly's suggestion is a good one. I would concur with that.
The only thing I would add is, Mayor, I would not want to see our workshops become 15 items, because that's what our regular meeting's for. But, I mean, if we want to add a couple more here and there, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think you guys know how I operate. I don't think I'd put out a 15-item agenda.
I know. I'm
So
just
we're
putting it
fine.
out there on the record.
But I totally agree with you.
Well, it's more than just you. It's who follows you too.
Oh, absolutely, and I understand.
So do we want to have an agenda item, like, don't go over a certain number, 5, 6?
I hate to put an arbitrary number on it because like tonight, I mean, we haven't done short service to any of the 4 items, but we'll be done here fairly quickly. And I just don't see, I just don't think it should be arbitrary. I think, again, you look at what you want to discuss, how much time you think it's going to take. If you run out of time, then I think it's kicked over to the next one. But I think we can use good judgment can be exercised. And I would trust that it would be.
I'm not against, do you want to up it to 5, just so we do have a limit? I wouldn't be against that. I just, I think limiting it to 3 sometimes, I know when Jeremy and I sit down, we're right at 4 a lot of the times, and we have to push them out other month. So I don't know if maybe up it to 5.
Well, technically, you violated the
Allow it
policy.
there or something.
Today.
Technically, you violated the policy tonight, and so, again, I would argue for some greater flexibility based on, again, the nature of the items and the time that might be necessary, but again, whatever the consensus of the group is here.
I'd be inconsistent to keeping it at 5 maximum.
I felt the same as you, Frank. I'm not a fan of anything that's arbitrary, but also if everyone's fine with 5, then I would go along with that also. But I like the idea of not, I do like the idea of not limiting it. Just use common sense and take a look at it and to see if we think we can get this done in time.
Is there any history on the workshops and why we started them?
There were some long ones.
Yeah,
You know,
there,
you get past 10:30 at night, your brain starts to,
Right.
it's harder to focus, but, I mean, I think that was the motivation behind it, was,
So it sounds like there's a consensus, bring it back, we'll change the language, we'll put it to 5, but then at the end of the day, when you guys get ready to vote, you can amend that out if you want, just by vote, but there's a consensus to bring it back tonight, so then we'll bring it back that way, right?
Sounds good to me. Any other comments? Mayor Young?
Nope, I'm good.
Any other comments, just any open matters?
real quick for the council's benefit, if any of you need ethics training to comply with the 4-hour requirement, the Florida League of Cities has a, on July 13th, there will be a webinar from 10 to 3:30. If you want to register for that, you can do that, and that'll satisfy your ethics training. I just received an email that, today that advertised that, so for your information.
And I think we all got that as well.
Okay.
I saw it. Can I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Good night.
Bye, guys.
Look at you, 35 minutes.
Close to the record.
Fairly simple. Fairly simple items.
All right.
We'll drop them.
Good, how you doing?
Good. Mr. Hall, you me on Friday, were you calling about the lift station?
Yeah.
So, we'll catch up.
When did you get that email?
I'm in
Yeah, I didn't get
magistrate
that
hearings
email.
in the
You didn't
morning.
get it?
I'm in the
I
office after
didn't get
lunch.
it either.
I'll give you a call.
Yeah.
I think Susan directed to me.
I can't keep track of what I do,
So
though.
I took that,
Doug.
that maintenance thing you did, and I put, right next to it, I put the cost that we have today, or at least the last.
I'll send it to Jeremy and ask him to send it to everybody.
$130